Our next guest is Martin Manley, whose new book, Basketball Heaven.
I was on TBS as an analyst, but was really there for no other reason than to hawk the book.
Let's start with the idea of efficiency.
In 1989, Martin Manley appeared on Inside the NBA at All-Star Weekend to talk about his new book, Basketball Heaven. 11 years before his national TV debut, it would have seemed impossible for Martin's life to lead there.
Martin turned 25 in 1978, and like a lot of 25-year-olds, he was something of an unformed mess. No longer a kid, barely an adult, he was living in a sleepy Kansas suburb, feeling adrift, spending countless hours driving aimlessly.
In his Toyota pickup truck, Martin had the gentle musical stylings of a single artist keeping him company.
Being an obsessive person, James Taylor is about the only artist I listen to with any regularity. It wasn't that I didn't like other songs and other artists, but they weren't James Taylor.
James Taylor famously sang "You've Got a Friend," but in Martin, he had an obsessed fan.
I knew every note and every word of every song. Nobody was as obsessive as I was about listening to the same thing over and over and over and over, 100, 200 times.
Sweet baby James, that is a lot of James Taylor. Martin also had other obsessions beyond the tender tracks of JT.
It probably wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I started drinking soda. Sometime shortly after that, it became the only thing I drank. No milk, no juices, no tea, no coffee, no beer, no water, no nothing, except pop.
Hopped up on caffeine and corn syrup, young Martin believed he was special, that he had certain gifts. He just didn't know yet exactly what they were or how to prove them to the world.
Lord knows he tried.
Not many people know this about me, but when I was 22 years old, I began memorizing the Bible.
James, a servant of God.
I began with the book of James and the first verse. I repeated it all day long.
The 12 tribes and the dispersion.
The next day, I learned the second verse.
Count it all joy, my brethren, when you meet various trials.
For a year and a half, I memorized a new verse each day. The problem was that I was running out of time, meaning it was harder and harder to recite the entirety of what I'd memorized each day because it took so long. It scared me into believing that someday I simply would no longer be able to remember every verse I had learned because I wouldn't have time to repeat the entirety every day. I'm such an all-or-nothing type person that it caused me to just stop cold.
When the obsession became inefficient, Martin stopped obsessing. He lost interest and moved on.
Perhaps Martin's belief in his own specialness had something to do with the fact that he literally saw the world differently than you and me. That's because he had a condition called synesthesia. Martin's brain paired numbers with colors in a way that made logical sense to Martin.
Most people don't make the connections I make, that being associating colors with a number. For most everyone, a 3 is a 3, nothing more, nothing less. However, that's not true for me. A 3 is yellow, duh. I can't remember a time when I did not see numbers as colors, and it wasn't until the past few years that I actually realized that nobody else I knew saw it that way.
It's possible to imagine Martin's arc not extending beyond this life of obscurity. But in 1979, the same year the NBA adopted the three-point line, something unexpected happened. Something that would change how Martin saw himself for the rest of his life.
One day, when I was 25 years old, I saw an IQ test in a magazine called Omni. It was unofficially called the world's hardest IQ test. I went ahead and filled it out and sent it in. Around 8 months later, I got a reply in the mail. It said my IQ was 156.
To put this number in perspective, 156 reportedly lands him in the same neighborhood as Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, and the Google founders. It's been speculated that if Einstein had taken an IQ test, he would have scored 160.
Within days, I had a huge rush of confidence, quit my job, and went back to school. I've often thought that when I opened my mail that day, it was the day that changed my life.
Martin had desperately wanted to prove to himself and the world that he was unique, brilliant. Now he had proof of his smarts. He had a number he could hold on to. 156. For Martin, white, red, green. The number arrived in the mail like a bouquet of flowers. From 30 for 30 Podcasts, I'm Nick Altshuler.
I'm Rich Levine. This is Chasing Basketball Heaven, Episode 2, Shoot Your Shot.
So how did Martin Manley, this eccentric dude with no connections or sports media background, go from 20-something unknown to prime-time analyst? Rich and I went searching for answers and found Martin's road to Fred Hickman's desk was winding, thrilling, and, at times, oddly romantic.
I first saw Chris in an evening economics class at Washburn University in September 1980.
That would be Christine Tillman, Martin's eventual first wife.
We went out to dinner on our first date. It was more like a job interview than a date. He loved making lists and checking off completed tasks. I didn't see a list that evening, but I would bet money there was one.
Chris agreed to answer our questions over email only, so we had an actress read her messages.
We discovered that Martin had prepared extensively for the interview. Well, the date.
1, where did I go to church? 2, had I been married? 3, did I have children? 4, what did I do in my free time? 5, did I have pets?
Chris told us that on their first date, Martin didn't share much about himself. But in a way we've come to think of as classic Martin, he was able to charm her nonetheless, almost by accident.
He had an old Toyota pickup at the time. It was Crayola green. The tailgate said "Yo," the only letters that still had white paint on them. He kept apologizing for that truck. I'm a country kid. Old pickup trucks are part of my life. No need for apologies. The seat wasn't dusty. That's the only thing I might have checked.
Chris was intrigued by Martin's unique qualities. The courtship moved quickly.
It wasn't too many weeks before we were meeting family and friends on both sides.
We were talking marriage within a few months, but you have to recognize that I was 27 and she was 29 at the time. Both of us were ready to settle down.
And so, less than a year after they started dating, Martin and Chris were married. It was 1981, and Martin's future came further into focus as he was close to earning a business degree.
He worked very hard and maintained a 4.0 GPA and was on the Dean's Honor Roll. We got right up to that last semester when he could finish.
But that's when fate intervened, and not for the last time, bending Martin's arc in a different direction.
That's when he met Joe Tongish and got involved in creating a small satellite dish that could give the user big dish results.
Joe Tongish. Friends called him Millionaire Joe.
He's that buddy who just knows how to make money.
The one who sees the financial opportunities that the rest of us don't.
A guy who might inspire Martin to drop out of college and take a chance.
He was sick of school, wanted to quit. I was disappointed, but decided he could always finish later.
Spoiler alert, Martin did not finish later.
In 1983, my partners and I started a satellite TV company in Topeka. I was primarily responsible for the retail division, but we also had a wholesale and manufacturing division and sold to other dealers all over the country.
In just a few years, Martin and his buddies built their business, Foci Satellite, from 3 people to almost 100 employees.
And the more time he spent studying the satellite industry, the more Martin noticed inefficiencies. And when Martin Manley noticed inefficiencies, he set out to solve them.
One way he did that was by charting his own signal interference maps for more targeted, effective sales. Innovations like this in the growing satellite TV industry helped Martin and Chris land a lovely suburban home by a park with a 2-car garage and plenty of room for kids, should they want them.
Life was good. Beautiful wife, steady job, house in the burbs. And when he had some spare time in the evenings, Martin put his own satellite TV to good use.
During those years, I had been able to watch tons of NBA games on satellite. and it turned me into an NBA fan.
He was already a huge college hoops fan.
That's practically written into the Kansas State Constitution.
But now Martin was exposed to the best basketball on the planet. His dish let him watch NBA games from across the country.
From the fabulous Forum in Englewood, California, a special edition of NBA basketball.
He watched the NBA all season. He taped what he couldn't watch live.
It was a great period for the league. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were in their prime. David Stern, the commissioner, had done a great job of marketing, and Michael Jordan was becoming a household name.
And while Martin was falling in love with the NBA, he also started to notice, surprise, surprise, some inefficiencies.
It remains a mystery to me how any coach can let the opposing player shoot a three-pointer when his team leads by 3 with just a few seconds to go.
When Martin had looked at the satellite TV industry, he saw a wasted opportunity and was obsessively driven to fix it. Now he looked at the NBA the same way. Consider Larry Bird.
Third quarter, Bird winds up from 3. Yes, Larry Bird. Take that.
In 1986, Martin watched Bird lead the league with 82 threes made. That's less than Brian Taylor hit to lead the league 6 years earlier. The curve should have been going up. The fact that it wasn't struck Martin as highly inefficient.
I do remember we had a discussion around the 3-point versus the 2-point shot.
That's Kevin Mahar, one of Martin's coworkers at the satellite TV business.
He made the argument that the value of the 3-point shot was if somebody shot a certain percentage, that was more valuable than a 2-point shot. And thus a player should take that as opposed to the 2-point shot.
Kevin and Martin had an unusual, though very Martin meet-cute. Young Kevin was working at Radio Shack when Martin came in one day to buy a new computer. Impressed by the teenage salesman's knowledge and people skills, Martin returned to the store a few days later, and he offered Kevin a job.
I mean, it doesn't take much to talk you out of working at Radio Shack.
Kevin became a sales rep for the satellite business and soon found himself on the receiving end of nonstop Martin takes.
So many takes.
The two guys hit it off. When they weren't busy disrupting an industry, they'd argue about the game they both loved.
I was a traditionalist. I was, brought up in the shadows of KU basketball and pounded inside and, take the layup whenever you can.
Because that's real basketball?
It was back then.
The traditionalist perspective, the perspective of virtually everyone in professional basketball at this point, was simple. A three-pointer is harder to hit, which it is. What the math tells you, though, is that a lower percentage from 3 can be worth more than a higher percentage from 2.
You remember that little math lesson from the last episode? Where we proved that 42% from 3 is actually better than 60% from 2?
It may seem weird now, but back then many people couldn't wrap their heads around this new idea. All they saw was the duality. Did the ball go through the hoop or not? A shot where the ball doesn't go in as often has to be bad, right? Even if the math tells you differently.
This kind of narrow thinking drove Martin nuts. Box scores pissed him off. In fact, Martin grew so frustrated with what he considered an inefficient way to measure basketball goodness, he began thinking of a new number that went beyond box scores.
The basketball fan has always been somewhat enamored with points. After all, points are the ultimate measurement. Still, it seems somewhat incomplete. I, for one, want to know more. Much more.
And then just as Martin's obsession with basketball started to take off, the satellite industry crashed.
We downsized and mostly eliminated the retail division.
But Martin didn't see the hit to his business as a setback. Instead, it was an opportunity.
This was perfect timing for me, as I've always been one to operate on 3 to 4 year cycles anyway.
His satellite company had given him what he needed, an income and exposure to the NBA. His spongy brain had soaked up the data. The numbers pointed his arc in a new direction, towards a new project.
And the inspiration for Martin's new quest was right there in Kansas. That former night watchman at the baked beans factory, Bill James, living only 40 miles away near Lawrence.
I was familiar with Bill James's work on baseball. James is considered the father of modern-day sabermetrics, the analysis of baseball from a statistical point of view.
Specifically, James was the first person to effectively make the case that on-base percentage is a better stat for measuring a baseball player's value than batting average. We don't care how you get on base, as long as you get on base. So it's easy to see why Martin identified with James. While James aimed to devalue batting averages in Major League Baseball, Martin wanted to do the same thing with the NBA's fixation on points per game.
By 1986, Bill James had been writing for nearly a decade. He'd published a new edition of Baseball Abstract each year all through the late 70s, and to little fanfare.
In fact, if not for a man named Dan Okrent, Martin may have never even heard of Bill James.
I'll give you, the canned history, and you can ask me to uncan some of it as you wish.
Okrent is an editor, biographer, and historian.
He's also the inventor of rotisserie baseball.
And in the late 70s, he wrote the first big profile of Bill James.
I saw a 1-inch ad in the Sporting News in, I believe, the 77 or 78 season. It said, baseball abstract, something like fascinating way to look at our beloved game, $5, post office box in Lawrence, Kansas, and it came mimeographed, and it blew me away. I couldn't believe it. I had never read anything like it, not only because of the nature of the statistical analysis, but also he's such a damn good writer.
Which makes sense. Bill James was an English major. He loves William Faulkner. Okrent felt he was the perfect profile.
And I was just beginning my career as a baseball writer. Proposed it to an editor at Sports Illustrated. I went out to Lawrence, Kansas. I spent time with Bill, his wife, his father, looked at the farm he grew up in, all that, and wrote a piece.
But according to Okrent, Sports Illustrated wouldn't publish it.
Because the fact checker, this is an illustration of what baseball was in those days. She said, well, it says here that Bob Kennedy of the Cubs is a really good general manager, but everybody knows he's a really bad general manager. Well, in fact, Bob Kennedy, through analytics that Bill brought to it, it demonstrated that the trades he made and that the roster decisions he made were very good decisions.
The problem was, Bill James was so far ahead of his time that his math was the only thing that could fact-check his math. But he was confident in his work. Naysayers be damned.
He had the courage of his convictions. He knew he was right. Not in every detail, but he knew that he was going the right direction, and he was abashed that people didn't pay attention to him in baseball. That he was dismissed.
A year later, Sports Illustrated finally published the story.
He does it by the numbers, was the headline. And really, it's hard to convey to anyone out there younger than the internet just what a big deal it was to be featured in Sports Illustrated back in 1981.
The internet was barely a glimmer in Al Gore's eye. Outside the local newspaper, there were very few places to read about sports. After Okrent's glowing feature, James's book sales skyrocketed. Publishers who had initially balked at James's abstracts came running back.
Suddenly, he offered $40,000 to Bill to publish it.
It's about $140,000 in today's money.
The fan response was immediate, and the publishers saw that.
By 1985, Baseball Abstract hit the New York Times bestseller list, and Bill James became one of the most popular sports writers in the country. He was showing the world how anyone with the right statistical knowledge could understand the game as well as the greatest managers. Here he is, sharing that perspective on a panel.
The people who favor logic and reason and research are much stronger and much better organized than we were 20 years ago. And the people who think that all of that is a characteristic of kids they didn't like in high school are clearly in retreat, but they're still very loud and very shrill and quite a bit on TV.
Martin watched that happen to Bill James. He was inspired. He wanted the exact same success, but in a different sport.
Baseball is, of course, the ultimate statistical sport, much more so than basketball. However, I grew up a basketball fan first and foremost, and so that was my first love. Consequently, it just made sense that I would try to adapt some statistical analyses that had never been done before to the sport and leave baseball to others.
For all its strategic nuance, baseball is actually a very simple game. A series of simple events. Pitcher throws ball, batter hits ball, batter reaches base, rinse and repeat.
Basketball analytics, on the other hand, attempts to measure the organized chaos going on around the ball. The point guard passes to the shooting guard. Shooting guard hits a three. But what was the power forward doing?
Maybe he set a good screen that got the shooter open.
Or maybe he just stood in the corner. But because he's good at threes, the defense had to guard him, creating more space for the shooting guard to hit his three. How do you measure that impact?
Martin wanted to be plucked from obscurity and recognized as a savant by the sporting world. And yeah, having a big pile of money would be great too.
Martin wanted to become Bill James. And how did Bill James become Bill James? He wrote a book.
So when we downsized,
Meaning the satellite business.
I decided to research and write a book called Basketball Heaven.
Martin gets to work on that book right after the break. As Martin Manley embarked on this new project of writing a book, his first move was to find an investor. So he reached out to his good buddy and the principal owner of the satellite business,
Millionaire Joe.
Joe Tongish.
He was always interested in what was going on in basketball, and his desire to write and his desire for statistics, he kind of cooked up that idea and came to me and said, I think there's a place for a statistical book on basketball. And so we sat down and he told me what his need was.
He shoots from way downtown.
I thought that was reasonable.
Cash. Literally. Joe invested roughly $60,000 in Martin's dream.
Next, Martin got permission from his wife.
Martin's decision to work on a book full-time really wasn't a shock. He thought about it for some time before he decided to make the commitment. He carefully planned his arguments for this proposed major life change. No PowerPoint presentation, but a presentation nonetheless. I was 29 when we got married, well established in my job. We couldn't afford to live the high life, but we could pay the bills on my income. I was confident in his ability, so I told him to go for it. The only way to know how successful an idea will be is to test it.
The final thing he needed was a true partner in crime.
The clay to his Steph.
The Mahorn to his Lambeer.
Once again, Martin needed Kevin from Radio Shack.
Kevin Mahorn!
The satellite TV thing kind of ran its course and ended, I want to say, my senior year, somewhere into my last semester of college. Graduated, got a job, moved to Wichita, Kansas, was working for Solo Cup Company, driving all over Western Kansas. Martin contacted me a little less than a year into that and started talking to me about this project and some of the possibilities that it had.
That included the possibility of making some money. But what really sold Kevin was the free room and board.
I moved in with him, lived with he and his wife for, I don't know, a couple years.
It's a little weird. It's not that weird.
It was a different time, people.
Lived in the basement. He had it all cleared out. And so his desk was down there. My desk was there. He had bought what at the time was some high-tech computer equipment and this desktop publishing software. He says, learn it, because I'm going to be over here writing all this. He wrote this whole thing longhand. All the numbers, all those graphs. It was all done by hand. Nothing went into the computer until I typed it into the computer.
One inspired passage that Kevin transcribed reads,
I have tried to develop a whole series of creative statistics which I hope will disclose the many nuances implicit in the maze of numbers. It seems strange that no consensus exists for what is the ideal formula for rating NBA players.
Martin was getting closer to landing on his dream stat, a number to replace points per game as the true indicator of basketball talent. a new vision for a globalizing sport, born in a Kansas basement.
But it turns out that writing a book on basketball statistics in the 1980s wasn't easy. It was much more difficult, in fact, than writing a book on baseball. Baseball had annuals, books available to fans full of stats for each team. Basketball didn't present stats at the same level, so Martin had to track down a lot of those numbers himself.
Research in those days meant sending off letters by snail mail, the federal post office. Who knows how long it would be before you got a response, if ever. There had been a handful of NBA basketball books written up to that point, but they were more of the encyclopedia type. Fortunately, that's really what I was looking for. The problem was that trying to get my hands on any of them was tough.
Exhaustingly, tediously tough.
Between driving some distances to libraries that had one of the books I wanted and sporadic contact with the NBA, along with using the NBA Guide and NBA Register, put out annually by the Sporting News, I was able to get all the NBA stats that had ever been made available up to that point in 1986.
Martin knew that once he had all the numbers, he'd have a full palette of colors and could paint the complete picture of what he wanted people to see.
But before he could take hold of the paintbrush, he needed someone to program the software on his computer. You had to do that back then. A computer didn't do much unless you told it how. So Martin put out an ad for a savvy programmer, and the universe brought him a young man named Todd Weller.
As I remember, we're sitting there discussing probably details of what he wanted, and he's sitting there eating with a letter opener.
Martin needed Todd to develop software that could help collect and track NBA stats, and to calculate Martin's formulas. But first, Todd had to calculate just how much of a weirdo his new boss might be.
Like a silver letter opener, these brownies, and cutting them off and eating it, and then all of a sudden he does this where
Which is what?
He scratches the back of his butt, butt crack or whatever, and then continues to eat with it. And I look at him kind of funny, and he just kind of looks at me like, what? But that was Martin.
What the hell?
Todd took the job anyway. Unsavory letter opener etiquette and all. Martin now had his crew. A visionary, a salesman, a coder. Real Topeka people.
All they needed was a ticking clock and a Vegas casino, and they could have been in a heist movie.
Kevin from Radio Shack knew all about ticking clocks.
We had a date. We were like, we've got to get it out by this date to have enough time for people to want to buy it before the NBA season starts.
What good is a seasonal comprehensive analysis, after all, if the season's already started? What fan is going to pay good money to read about his team when their best player already tore his ACL?
Martin gave the book this tagline: the ultimate book for the ultimate fan. And the ultimate stats book would need the ultimate stat, a number that showed which players had the most value, but beyond the box score. A number Martin had been thinking about since he first installed his satellite system at home and became obsessed with the game.
I just couldn't stand to continue seeing players evaluated exclusively by points. I thought a simple but comprehensive formula could be used to evaluate a player's complete game performance. What I came up with was the production rating. Never again would I be in the dark about which player really deserved the headlines. My dream, of course, was, and is, that not only could I be enlightened, but so could basketball fans everywhere.
Production rating. This was Martin's number. Thanks to Bill James, baseball's general managers changed the value of on-base percentage. Could production rating change basketball?
The problem with points as the primary indicator of value is, of course, because it is an oversimplified measurement. For example, who's better, Dale Ellis, 25.8 points per game, or Magic Johnson, 19.6 points per game? We all know the answer to that question. Ellis is obviously good, but he's no Magic. Therefore, if Seattle were to play Los Angeles, it would be inadequate to look at Ellis scoring 26 points while Magic scored 20 and make any determination about who had the better game. Magic had had 7 more assists, 2 more rebounds, and 1 more steal. That changes the immediate impression given by the box score.
Production rating squeezes all that other stuff, the good and the bad, into one tidy and...
Are you about to drop the E word?
Oh, you know I am. One tidy and efficient calculation.
It won't surprise anybody to know that basketball statistical data goes miles beyond production rating. But just use the following formula every time you peruse a box score, and you'll know which player won the game for his team, even if the newspaper doesn't tell you. Points plus rebounds plus assists plus blocks plus steals.
That's all the good stuff.
Minus turnovers plus missed field goals plus missed free throws.
That's all the bad stuff.
Equals credits. Credits per season divided by games equals credits per game equals production rating.
Basically, you add up the positive stats, then subtract the sum of the negatives.
An example would be Michael Jordan during 1988. By applying the formula, he earned 2,874 credits. Since he played in 82 games, he had a production rating of 35.05.
While Martin and his crew hammered away on Basketball Heaven, a Florida-based sports writer named Dave Heron was working on a book of his own. Heron had a stats and basketball pedigree. He'd spent a year in the 60s as the statistician for the New York Knicks. And he created what is now recognized as basketball's first advanced stats formula, Tendex.
Like production rating, Tendex calculates a player's efficiency by adding and subtracting a series of values. But that sum is then divided by the player's time on the court and multiplied by the pace of the game.
The aesthetic flaws are obvious. Charles Barkley ranked number 1 with the rating of 826. I don't mean to sound critical.
Oh, sure, Martin.
But what is 826? How does it fit into our pre-existing ideas of what an excellent rating means? Again, Magic Johnson had a production rating of 31.79. It follows very closely the parameters of scoring. 30 plus per game is superstar.
Martin believed that basketball's definitive efficiency formula should be something that any fan could easily calculate and understand.
Other formulas, which end up with numbers that don't fit into pre-existing categories in our thinking, just cannot be expected to catch on with the general public.
The plan was now in place. Beat Heron to publication and get Basketball Heaven into the world before the 1987 season. To do that, Martin changed his life in ways that might seem strange. But to those who knew him, this was just Martin being Martin.
I started skipping lunch because it meant taking a break, and I didn't want no stinking breaks. I never ate breakfast, so it turned into a lifestyle whereby I would eat once a day, supper.
What was kind of interesting was Martin would work 48 hours straight, and then he would go to bed for 10 hours, maybe 12, and then get up and do it all over again.
Kevin eventually got in on the action as well.
I didn't work that schedule until we got down to the end where we were kind of on a deadline. And then I pushed myself to do it. I'd say I did it for maybe a month. I'd push myself to meet his commitment at the end, kind of see if I could do it.
When he finally had the manuscript in hand, Martin made a pilgrimage to see the stats guru himself, Bill James. Martin wanted the blessing of the guy who had inspired him, and he also wanted a cover quote.
Martin was extremely excited about it because, again, Bill James was the king of this genre, and had done it in the baseball stuff. And having him right there in Lawrence was, I think, even more special for Martin.
A quote from Bill James on the cover of Basketball Heaven would give the book legitimacy, validation. For Martin, going to see James was a huge moment, a meeting of two great math minds. This was Einstein meeting Niels Bohr, Northeast Kansas style.
Was he nervous?
Martin?
Yeah.
Nah.
He was just so sure of himself, no matter.
Martin's pretty sure of himself, yeah.
When I met with Bill after the first book had been completed, he offered to put me in touch with his agent in New York City. Ultimately, she was able to get a book deal with Doubleday, and the rest is history.
Martin even returned home with a money quote from Bill James for the cover of his book.
Basketball Heaven is thorough, fresh, and occasionally brilliant. Manley's systematic analysis of basketball from the time of George Mikan to the present is unlike anything I've ever seen about the sport. His research is massive, his writing lucid, and his approach novel.
Martin's book now had the instant credibility he desired, and it was packed with stats and theories to keep fans busy for an entire season. He was on the fast track. The basketball world would simply have to recognize his genius.
By February of 1989, Martin had written 2 editions of Basketball Heaven. A lot of work, but that's the game with almanacs. After a year, the math is old. Every season, a new version with updated numbers, ideas, and predictions.
To this point, sales were slow, but that's also the game here. This kind of thing takes time. Take Bill James. He sold fewer than 350 total copies of his first 2 editions.
And Martin wanted Basketball Heaven to be a kind of metaphysical breakthrough, while also being a money-printing bestseller. Or, as he writes in his book,
I don't want to be thought of as just a number cruncher, but rather a number creator. That is, one who creates a measurement or rating which otherwise would not have existed, one who discovers an important previously concealed bit of information that otherwise could not have been appreciated.
Though the public hadn't yet embraced Basketball Heaven, Martin had made friends in high places. The second edition received an endorsement from Commissioner David Stern,
the influential, intimidating boss of the NBA.
And I can just read this for you right here, what the commissioner wrote. Because of its original perspective, Basketball Heaven provides statistical insights and food for thought, which will enhance the enjoyment of the game for even the most devoted NBA fan.
That's the NBA equivalent of being made.
And now, he just had to convince the rest of the world.
Which was what he had a chance to do at the 1989 NBA All-Star Weekend in Houston.
We are now inside a sold-out Astrodome.
His brown suit was camouflaged against a TBS set. His mustache twitched above his smirk. Martin was sitting with Fred Hickman. He looked both nervous and excited, cocky even. He'd done his homework. He was gonna ace the test. And when he did, the game would change forever.
Before it's all over. Joining me now is a legend in his own time, and he's got a book to prove it. This is the book, Basketball Heaven. It is penned by Martin Manley. Martin Manley is a statistician extraordinaire. He has done for basketball what Bill James has done for baseball. And
Martin's dream was now his new reality. And Fred Hickman was running things like a seasoned pro, a broadcasting point guard in a custom suit.
And Martin, let's talk about it right now. You've watched these teams all season long. Surprises in the Eastern Conference. Cleveland, because they're so good. Indiana.
For some context here, at the 1989 All-Star break, the Cleveland Cavaliers were the talk of the Eastern Conference. A lot like the 24-25 Cavs. They were the young upstarts running everyone off the court.
The Pacers, meanwhile, were a laughingstock. 11-35, and already on their fourth head coach of the season.
Surprises in the Eastern Conference. Cleveland because they're so good, Indiana because they're so bad?
Well, definitely those two are true. Along with those, naturally, Milwaukee and Philadelphia both overachieved this year somewhat. Milwaukee more so, but they've both done a tremendous job. Far better than I think anybody thought they would.
Honestly, not the worst start. A nice shout out to the Bucks, who had won 19 of 24 games heading into the All-Star break. Martin's just getting loose. Let's see where he went with it.
There aren't too many other teams other than Indiana that have done that much worse than anybody thought. But then there aren't that many more losses yet to be given out besides what Indiana's accomplished. So,
oh, no. Martin.
It's hard to parse that one.
There aren't that many more losses yet to be given out besides what Indiana's accomplished is a hell of a way to say the Pacers stink.
The words, they just kind of stream out of him like air from a leaking balloon.
I realize it's Martin's first time on TV, but he was incredibly inefficient.
Martin might not have his touch, but Hickman throws the ball right back to him.
What about the Chicago Bulls? Michael and the rest of the guys, what are they ever going to be able to do to give this a good, cohesive team type of look?
A little more context. Through Michael Jordan's first 4 seasons, the Bulls were a combined 12 games under 500, and they won just a single playoff series. So it might sound weird now, But asking back then if Jordan and the Bulls could ever get it together was not an uncommon question.
Which gave Martin a chance to say something out of the ordinary. And here's the thing. Martin had written a deep preview of the Bulls' '89 season, with compelling arguments and cogent analysis, from the second edition of Basketball Heaven.
Some argue that Jordan tries to do too much. Nevertheless, Chicago was 27-14 when Michael scored in the 30s, 10-4 when he scored in the 40s, and 3-1 in the 50s. Can anyone seriously suggest they would rather he score in the 20s, where Chicago's record was 10-13?
That is an original, interesting opinion. Because while critics claim that young Michael Jordan was too focused on scoring, Martin's numbers show that the fewer points he scored, the worse the Bulls did.
But wait, he's got more. Martin closes out the preview in his book with a stat illustrating what happens when the young Jordan involves his teammates.
When any of the two of the four, Grant, Pippen, Paxson, and Sellers, scored in double figures, Chicago was 35-11. When less than two hit that magic mark, the team was only 15-21.
The Bulls win when Michael Jordan scores a lot, but they're even better when his teammates chip in. So Jordan should trust his teammates to sink some shots.
This is an informed take, and would have been perfect, prophetic even, to say in 1989.
Perhaps Martin could have even just said the Bulls need to play more efficiently.
Always a great time to pull out the E word. Martin could have said any of this stuff and essentially predicted the future.
What about the Chicago Bulls? Michael and the rest of the guys, what are they ever going to be able to do to give this a good, cohesive team type of look?
Instead, he said this.
It's difficult to say. Obviously, when you've got a player like a Michael Jordan, it's extremely difficult to think what kind of pieces do you put with him to make it work out perfectly. With Magic or with Bird, for some reason or another, they had that ability to make all those other players fit into a cohesive unit. But Jordan, they're trying to fit the pieces in rather than them fitting in naturally.
It's difficult to say? Yeah, maybe for a non-genius. Martin had already solved the Jordan problem in his book. But now, with the world watching, he went with an ice-cold non-answer, hinting that, for some vague reason, Jordan's Bulls weren't as good as Bird's Celtics or Magic's Lakers.
If you called into your sports radio station with that opinion, they would hang up.
Okay, Martin, that takes care of the...
After a video montage, Martin and Hickman share an uninspiring back and forth about the Western Conference.
The Phoenix Suns, the Golden State Warriors.
Right. Well, those are the two teams I think that are surprising.
And then, at the end of the segment, Martin does get one last shot. And Rich, I think this is the part that bothers you the most.
I just think it perfectly sums up where this life-altering opportunity just fell flat.
Give me a quick prediction, William. Who's going to be in the NBA Finals?
NBA Finals, Lakers versus Pistons.
It's just the most obvious take to take.
The blandest, coldest take. You'd have to give me something to take that take.
The Lakers had beat the Pistons the year before in the 1988 Finals. Both teams were dominated again so far in '89. This prediction was like picking only number one seeds in your Final Four bracket. You might end up being right, but right or wrong, it's lame.
Okay, we'll hold you to that.
I'm really going out on a limb.
And for what it's worth, the Lakers and Pistons did play again in the '89 Finals. So Martin was right.
Yes, and water everywhere continued to be wet.
For Martin, that was always the most important thing, being right. But to sell books, you have to show people that you know something that they don't.
You don't sell the sabermetrics, you sell the sizzle. It's like gravity. It's not impressive for you to say what comes up must come down. The impressive part is showing your math that proves it. Martin had a chance to do that.
To take a big shot. Something like, yeah, Fred, it'll be Lakers and Pistons once again. But this time, Detroit will have LA's number. You heard it here first. Oh, did you know that the Pistons are shooting twice as many three-pointers as they did last year? They get it, Fred. The future is now. The Pistons win.
Instead, Martin simply went with the chalk matchup. He didn't even guess a winner. And then the interview ended.
Martin Manley, who is the author of the great publication, Basketball Heaven. You got to go out and pick it up. It's terrific. We're glad that he joined us. We hope you will come back with us.
Live on national television, Martin never once mentioned Basketball Heaven.
Or production rating. or three-pointers, or even the word efficiency. It's one thing if Martin failed as Martin, if he was too weird, or if he used too many numbers.
If he'd gone up there and rattled off the first 2 books of the Bible.
Yeah, I would watch that. But Martin wasn't himself up there. He was the kind of cookie-cutter NBA analyst that he would have scoffed at from his basement.
He stayed in Houston for the rest of the weekend and watched as the game ended with a 41-year-old Kareem Abdul-Jabbar hitting his signature shot.
Here's the hook. All right. Yes! That's great. Standing O. Wonderful. He hit the sky hook.
Yep, the big tall man scored. But not before the first 2 entry passes were stolen, leading to 2 highlight buckets from Michael Jordan, who grabbed the league's torch as the game leapt into the 90s.
Game is over and the West moved out to a big early lead, were threatened, and then came back and put him away. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in his 18th...
Martin left Houston without making a name for himself.
He was boring, uninspired. He was perhaps his greatest fear. He was average.
There is zero chance that I'm going to wake up tomorrow or anytime soon and decide that I'm no longer motivated to be different. I not only don't want to be the same as everyone else, I don't want to be the same as anyone else.
He never appeared on national TV again. As far as anyone knew, Martin Manley disappeared. Gone. But not entirely forgotten. Because while he failed on television and returned home, his book continued to travel.
Ending up in the hands of someone who would be a part of the revolution that would change the game forever.
The UW library had a copy of it when I was a student at the University of Washington. It was definitely intriguing to me.
Next time on Chasing Basketball Heaven.
I realized I knew something at that moment that no one else in the world knew.
The field of basketball analytics grows, but Martin's life takes another turn.
Chris and I drifted apart. I take 100% of the blame.
And his obsession with efficiency pushes him in a startling new direction.
I decided I wanted to have one of the most organized goodbyes in history, and I think I will be successful.
Chasing Basketball Heaven is a 30 for 30 podcast produced by ESPN, Hyper Object Industries, and Meadowlark Media.
It was reported and hosted by Nick Alschuler and Rich Levine, with Craig Kilborn as the voice of Martin Manley.
Executive producers from Hyper Object Industries and Meadowlark Media are Adam McKay, Claire Slaughter, and Bradley Campbell.
Senior editorial producer of 30 for 30 podcasts is Preethi Varathan. The series senior producer is Raghu Manavalan. Our series producer was Gus Navarro.
Consulting producer was Gary Honig.
Story editors were Jamie York and Mac Montandon.
Sound design and mixing by John Delore.
Theme song composed by Allison Leighton Brown and John Delore.
Show art by Brian Lutz.
Becca Lish is the voice of Chris Tillman.
Fact-checking by Matt Giles and David Sabino.
For 30 for 30 and ESPN, line producer is Catherine Sankey.
Associate producer is Isabella Seaman.
Production assistants are Diamante McKelvey and Anthony Salas.
Producer is Carolyn Hepburn.
Senior producers are Marquise Daisy and Gentry Kirby.
Heather Anderson, Marcia Cook, Brian Lockhart, and Burke Magnus are executive producers for 30 for 30.
Rights and clearances by Jennifer Thorpe and Cal Griffith.
This podcast was developed by Tara Nadolny and Cynthia Parabello.
To listen to more sports series like this one, search 30 for 30 podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us at 30for30podcast.com. Thanks for listening.